But I guess to start, I would love to kind of know, how did Wedding Season even come across your table? Like, how did you come across this script? And then what was it about this script specifically that made you even initially get interested in it?
Sure. So the script was sent to me by my manager. I don't know when, it must have been the beginning of 2020. And I really liked the world, and the script felt very honest to me. It was clear that Shivani had, even though this was her first script, it was clear that she had lived this story. And so one of the things that I look for is for the script to be telling this person's truth, that I could feel that she was telling her truth through the script. And that was something that I responded to. And also I really liked the fact that it took place within the South Asian community in New Jersey, because, to be honest, had the story been about white people, I would not have been as interested. And because I like to immerse myself into other worlds and sort of build out worlds. And with romantic comedies, it's really hard to do something that feels new and different and fresh, because everybody knows how the movie ends as soon as it begins. And so I thought, well, this is like a nice way to come at it. I really haven't seen any romantic comedies with Indian Americans at the center of it. And I thought, this is really fascinating. And oh my God, they're actually willing to meet with me. That's really cool. So, because I know that they met with a lot of South Asian directors too, from what I heard. But I also felt confident that I knew what the script needed, having done a romantic comedy before, and I've written a couple of other romantic comedies for different studios. And so it's a genre that I enjoy. I hadn't done one in, a while. But I just felt very confident that I knew how to make this movie, and I knew what it needed. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to make. And I hadn't done a movie in a while, and I really wanted to get back shooting again. And I liked the producer, and I liked Shivani. And then when I met with Netflix, it became clear. I went in there with a pretty distinct point of view about it and what I felt like the script needed. And they seemed to be on board with it. And I think one of the reasons why they considered hiring me also was that they didn't want it to feel too niche, like that they wanted. And I think we all agreed that we wanted this to feel like an American story first, in that it's a very relatable story, and it's the story of America, and that we are such a melting pot, and the story of first generation immigrants is like so much of who we are, and I think at a time when the country is so divisive, so divided. I also liked the idea of doing a movie like this that could celebrate diversity and tell a story that would be kind of a classic romantic comedy, but just seen through eyes of somebody a bit different.
Gotcha. By the way, Failure to Launch, iconic rom.
Thank you.
Like, I cannot wait to watch this movie tomorrow. I have my popcorn ready. I already told Shivani, like, I'm gonna email her as soon as this is done. So I'm really excited to see this.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
And then, you kind of touched on it a second ago, the honesty in her screenplay. Something that she said was like the reason her manager wanted to rep her is because he said he could feel her voice. So coming from the director, I'm always curious to get that perspective from you. Like, when you say you felt the honesty, or maybe you noticed her voice, like, what advice can you have for people that are just starting to screenwriter? Like, what should we be trying to hit with our scripts? Like, how can we resonate with people to get across our voice or our honesty in our screenplays? It's such a abstract concept that's so hard to kind of grasp when you're first starting out. But like, what does that mean? Honesty and voice, the voice in our screenplays.
I think that's a good question. There's so many different ways to answer that. I think that because you're trying to do multiple things at once when you're trying to figure out, what to write, starting out. Like, one thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to write the movie that you would pay to go see on opening weekend. Yeah. When I write scripts, I try to write the scripts that I wish my agent was sending me. and I also think about, the movies that I love and what kinds of stories do I love. And so, and then think about those movies and think about, well, why am I affected by these movies? What is it emotionally that moves me about these stories or the way that these stories are told? So obviously there's something going on with me and with what is connected to my voice that resonates with what I'm seeing. And so it's an elusive thing, because I don't necessarily think that people should just be writing what they know. I mean, it's like, I get that that's good advice, but I feel like a voice is not so much writing what you know as it is writing what you, sorry, it's my son trying to
Totally good.
get me from New York. I feel like it's not so much write what you know, but it's write what you feel, like write what moves you.
Gotcha. Like your emotional truth,
Yeah. Like, what are the kinds of things that just really, affect you, or that you find yourself thinking about, or, I'm not being that clear here, but I think, it's more about write what you feel versus what you know, I think, for me anyway.
I love that. Yeah. And like,
because I when I started writing, I worked with a lot of big screenwriters. I worked with a lot of big screenwriters on the movies I did. And then when I decided that I wanted to start writing too, I thought, well, I've worked with Scott Frank and et cetera, et cetera. Like, I know how to write a movie. But I really didn't. It's like, it's one thing to be a director and kind of, throw out lines of dialogue. It's another to actually have to like figure out structure and figure out all these other things.
Yeah.
And I came out of the gate like writing, this thriller that was completely different than anything I had done. And so I think that sometimes the mistakes that I was, some of the mistakes I was making when I started writing were like trying to write something that I thought could get made, or like something that I thought, was connected to what I had done, and therefore it'll get made. I just think anytime you're trying to write something that you think will get made, you're in trouble.
Gotcha.
Versus something that you really are excited about.
Sure. Something else I would love to get your perspective on. Like you said, you've directed and worked with screenwriters. You write your own screenplays. With this movie, Shivani wrote it. When you're collaborating with someone, because for us screenwriters, it's such a like elusive thing. Sometimes we're very protective of our work, which I don't think is really a great thing. But when you start collaborating with someone, what is it that you're looking to bring to the story yourself? Because it's like the story is already established. So from a director's perspective, are you thinking about subtext? Are you thinking about emotional things that you can start inserting in there?
That's a good question. So there's a couple of different things. First of all, there are sort of ideas that I came in with that needed to be addressed just from a very practical standpoint. She was amazing in the process in that she didn't feel threatened, and she was very open about it. Now that's going to completely depend on the director that you're working with, and and if you like the ideas that he or she has. So that I don't think there's any blanket way of saying, it needs to be, this or that. But in this situation, the thing that I appreciated so much from Shivani is that she didn't feel threatened by ideas and, and suggestions and whatnot. And so that was great, because then I didn't feel like I was taking something that was so personal to her and sort of butchering it in a way that would work for me. So, I also sort of shared like some of my favorite episodes of script notes with her, and tried to like,
that's a great podcast.
Like try to get her to see kind of how how I've learned to see things at certain, when it comes to certain, whether it comes to structure or character or plot. So I came in, my notes were like, there were some notes like that were practical notes, and then there were other notes that were more like, it just felt like it needed a more rigorous structure. And so, ideas for how to do this and how to do that. And so she turned around a couple more passes based on my notes. And then I did some dialogue work and whatnot after that. So it was a really nice collaboration, and I learned from her, and I think she learned from me, and I kept saying to her, you know, like, you're the one who actually wrote a script that's getting greenlit into a movie. Like, I've never done that. So, you know, don't be afraid to tell me if, you know, something doesn't feel right to you. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I mean,
own this.
I love that. Just I mean, this is what I hear from everyone I talk with. Like, you have to be able to not take things personally. When someone is giving you ideas and criticizing, it seems like that's one of the most like valuable tips you can give us, is like, you have to learn to not take your stuff personal. How are you going to ever be able to collaborate with anyone?
And it's, you know, it's hard not to, obviously, because you're putting yourself out there in such a personal way. And there's that great Script Notes episode about notes, like how should executives give notes, and there's a whole spiel about like what it's like to be a writer and going into that room and pitching this thing, or having somebody read your script that you,
for sure,
you know. But yeah,
I would love to. I mean, you've written screenplays before too, so I would love to just get any advice or any tips that you have on how do you even develop a story. Like, what is that first idea, that first seed of an idea that comes to mind, and then what's like your next step? I mean, even with a movie that you didn't write and you're just directing, I'm sure there's still a similar process. Like, what is that first step you take when that idea comes to you?
So it's two different things. So with Wedding Season, what I did was I made, you know, half a dozen pages of notes just on the script to then go into the studio and kind of see what they thought. And then once I was on board making the movie, then the first thing I do is I put it up on a board. I put it up on a 4x you know, foam core, and I break the movie into you know, 3 acts, like 12 sequences more or less, just because I need to know that all the moves are there, you know, not that we have to like adhere to those slavishly, but I'm a visual person, and I need to see the script on the big board in my office. And then I also, concurrent to that, I will put the whole movie up in my office in like in pictures, you know, and then that gets added to, you know, when we're location scouting, etc. When I'm writing my own stuff, I feel like everyone is different. You know, I was talking to Wes Anderson about this, and he said it always starts with a character. He falls in love with a character, and it's of this. I was talking to Barbet Schroeder about it, and he said it starts with a moment. Like, there's a charged moment, and that I see, and whether it's like a really difficult decision or something with the protagonist, and then everything is built out around that. He actually will shoot a documentary and then about the subject, and then write the movie. I think really everyone's different about that. I find that in the things that I've written, sometimes I fall into the trap of falling in love with a set of ideas or an event, or, you know, a canvas, like a world, and then I'll try to figure out, okay, you know, who are the characters in that world. But ultimately, it really always, any of the serious work that happens, it has to come down to, for me, character. Like, who are the characters? What is it they want? And, you know, it's that Sorkin thing where it's just like, I need a character and I need obstacles.
Gotcha. Like, intention, and that's his whole thing, intention, obstacle.
Yeah.
Constantly preaching.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But I think I'm a very visual person, so I need to see it. You know?
That's a really like interesting insight, because you're a director, that like, that's the first thing you do is you start putting it up visually, which is a really good tip for us screenwriters too. Like, we should try to get out of our heads more and like picture it too, you know?
Yeah. But then when I'm writing, and I usually can write I can't write until I have the whole thing laid out. But then even when I'm writing, sometimes it will feel like I'm in a completely dark room and I'm walking and I'm just trying to feel my way. And I have no idea where, you know, like what I'm gonna encounter in the darkness. And that's a really hard thing. But once you start to like go from stone to stone, and you start to get to know those characters, then that's a really wonderful feeling. And once they can start to take on a life of their own, it's a really cool thing. And that is something that I find is similar between directing and and writing, is that I feel like that happens on the page, and it also happens when you're shooting a movie. At a certain point, the characters start to take on the life of their own.
I mean, that makes me want to ask like a couple of questions. One is, do you ever outline? Do you think about outlining or like plot points?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's what the cards are. That's how I mean, that's my outlining process. Is I will just start with at the left side of the board and literally, what's the first scene? Gotcha. Where's our character? And then I kind of just, I have to hit these signposts, page 10, 17, end of the first act, midpoint, end of second act. I need those signposts to just give me, place, like, so that I have some places to go to, but all of the scripts I've written have been pretty different. And yet they do all follow that. I'm a believer in the 3-act structure, and I find that very helpful. And I'm also very much still a developing writer. So at my advanced age, I still feel like I'm like only getting to the place now where I feel like I can write a good enough script to have it made. And I agree with Apatow when he says, like, you have to just know starting out that your first 10 scripts are going to suck. You have to write 10 scripts before one is going to be good enough to get made. Yeah. And just if you understand that, that'll take some pressure off you.
Yeah, that's like where I'm at right now. I'm on like my 5th bad script right now. So, like, I really want to give a little bit more perspective on character, because you said that with the screenplays and the directing process too, like the characters start to come to life. But like, as someone writing a script or someone reading a script, what is it on the page that brings a character to life? Like, what is it? All the elements? Is it specific dialogue? Like, what tips can you give to a writer? Like, hey, here's how maybe you can bring your characters alive a little bit more. Because I do feel like that's one of the hardest parts, and it's so abstract, like how to bring something 2-dimensional to life on the page. But what is it that like you look for when you're reading a script?
I mean, again, it's more what I'm looking for is to feel something for the characters. And so that comes out of empathy, and empathy comes out of the writer's ability to communicate the protagonist's desires and dreams, and allow us to feel what that character is feeling. And that's really, this goes to this note about likability, which is that it drives me crazy too. You'll hear like Craig Mazin go off on this, and it's just, and I got the note too from Netflix on this movie, like, make sure she's likable. They were really afraid she wasn't likable enough. And of course, for me, I'm always thinking like, flawed characters drive stories. She has to be flawed. She has to have rough edges. Like she needs a place to go, she needs room to evolve. But I'm always looking for, I guess I'm looking to feel for the characters. And so I think as a writer, just being aware of that, about flaws, and really making sure you communicate in a way like what it is that this character is really searching for. So if you look at like, There Will Be Blood, that guy is a total asshole, but you just get the sense from the very first scene when he falls in the bottom of that hole, like, here's a guy that wants something so badly that we feel it in a very visceral way, and that's a very engaging thing. So
yeah, that's such an iconic opening scene.
I
love that movie. Okay, so you said this note that Netflix gave you, this note of like likability. I actually watched an interview you did a while back where you were talking about, and this is like a broad subject. So, and I guess we can kind of I would love to talk with you more, but unfortunately.
Yeah, and you can always call me back at some point. I know you have another thing at 4. So.
But like I saw you do an interview, and you talked a little bit about like how, I forget which movie it was, but you saw the movie on an airplane and they changed the format, and you were like, it was so annoying to you that they changed the format because you really, like, every frame matters and you really care and put a lot of effort into every frame. And so even like this note with Netflix talking about likability, I'm just curious of your kind of broad thoughts on the industry right now, like streaming, studios. Like, this is something that just comes up all the time in conversation. It's something that sometimes I worry about as a screenwriter, like, the type of movie that I want to write, is it even possible to like get it made these days? Like, so I would love to get your thoughts a little bit on like the industry and maybe where you think things are going the next 10 years, 5 years, you know?
I think that, one thing that this was the first streamer that I had directed. And one thing that was surprising to me is that during the script development, occasionally I felt like I was trying to talk character and structure, and they were kind of responding with metrics. And so I felt that is a difficult creative conversation to have, because when an executive says, well, our metrics show us that the audience really likes it when this happens, it's a really hard way it's hard to respond to that. And so I felt like, geez, I need to learn more about metrics. And in return, I was thinking also, like, I hope that whoever's running these divisions is also continuing to try to help educate the executives to like my language, as well. And so I feel like there's, in a way, there are these two languages that we kind of both need to evolve and understand where the other people are coming from, as streamers, obviously are taking over the world, and as it becomes the sort of the norm, because when my earlier movies, there were just many meetings with executives at the studios, and you're in the same room, and you're kind of talking through these things, and you can read the language. Obviously, we made this during the pandemic, so that was extra hard. Everything was on Zoom. But
I can't imagine that, like, having to do everything just through Zoom. That must have been tough.
Yeah, it's tiring, and it's just a bit harder, and it's harder to hire people that way, because you can't really read like chemistry and stuff. But I think, I think that just for your own sake, I would highly encourage you to continue to write what you love, versus trying to write something that you think is going to, appeal to the streamers, because it's always changing too. Anytime that there's a hit, like if romantic comedy comes out and does big, then everybody wants to chase that for a couple months, and then it just is always changing. I think people are just looking for original voices, but obviously they keep going to the well, in terms of genre. Yeah. These wells of horror or romantic comedy or action or whatnot.
Gotcha.
So
I think that's a really interesting. I love what you said though, like these two languages, because I've never really thought about it like that, but it is true. The streamers have it's just like a different dimension now with the amount of data that they have in.
Yeah. And I think that we, as creative people, we have to be careful about not saying like, your numbers don't mean anything when we're talking about script. Like, they do clearly mean a lot. So I think I do feel like we both parties, like both sides, need to kind of like continue to learn each other's language.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. I cannot wait to watch this movie now, just in these conversations with you and Shivani. It's so interesting getting the perspectives, and I'm going to be just kind of thinking about everything y'all are saying when I watched it. So,
oh, good. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's I'm proud of the movie, proud of the work that everyone did on it, particularly making it during the height of COVID. It was a big challenge, and I think it's a small movie with a big heart. And I really enjoyed working with everybody. So. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad that Shivani seems to like it, and that was really important to me, because I wanted to make sure to do right by her vision.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see it. So I'll cool. Definitely, I'm going to shoot you an email, and I'll hopefully chat with you again here pretty soon.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot. Take care.
You too. Bye.